everyone, this is Al McKay, and I want to welcome you to a new lesson. So far in this training, we've been doing a lot. We've been focusing on our destruction shot and understanding a true destruction workflow. Obviously, there's a lot to take in, and I wanted to give us a bit of a break before we move into doing the explosions and the pyro elements. There's been a lot of people in the forums who've been saying, what the hell, there's so much that we're going through. And it's been really cool to put as much into these videos as I can. So this lesson, we're going to take all of the hard work that we've done and look into exporting all of it and finalizing it. And the benefits of this is we won't any longer need to calculate our sims every time we load them up. We're going to be caching everything out as a renderable model. This is really great in production because it means that we can simply hand over the element to the lighting department and they can integrate it into their scene. Which is always great because it means that we can neatly hand over an asset, and then you can also just update the cache, and then all of their assets and everyone using your asset in the studio will automatically have the latest version already updated in their scene as soon as you publish it, rather than needing to merge in all of your elements, your particle system, and everything else, which gets extremely messy. So besides exporting the scene, we also bake out collision meshes of everything, which also allows us to use this for our fluid simulations so that our smoke, fire, and everything will wrap around the building, as well as react to when chunks fall through and fall down. Everything will move around it as it should. So this drastically helps the realism and makes everything react realistically and accurately as well. One of the really cool features I haven't touched on yet is displacement detail, which is adding detail to the surfaces of broken concrete. The thing is, every time I've seen anyone talk about destruction, whether it's in paid courses or free, they're always making the mistake of adding the displacement in as part of the simulation, which makes sense when you have an object in your scene, just like a single tutorial object or something, and it's breaking into 3 to 5 pieces, but it's impossible to consider in a real production shot. So I wanted to introduce this technique that I've developed, what I call a post-fracture process, which we're able to detail out the rocks and choose which rocks and how many or how much of the concrete actually gets added detail. And this is also all done after the simulation, so it doesn't affect simulation speeds. So one thing for me is the top part of the building as it begins to break away, my eye always catches how flat some of the areas are. They're quite faceted, and I've always wanted to be able to add extra detail in where I think it's really critical. So these are the things that are most vital to think about as an effects TD to keep your simulations fast and still retain detail, and the end result is always what we're aiming for in production. So I'm really excited to get into this lesson and finalize our entire building destruction, so let's get started. Okay, in this lesson we're going to be doing a lot of really cool stuff. This is definitely a bit more on the advanced side, and some of this is optional. But the key thing is that we're going to export all of our geometry cached out as objects, so that way we can use these not only to render everything, but also we can use it as collision objects as well. So we're going to do some special stuff to allow us to create all the collision objects that we're going to use for some of our explosions and things like that that are really important to be able to get the interaction, the collisions with the building, as well as the fluids. So we're going to be doing a lot. So opening up our scene, there's a couple of things that I want us to do in the beginning, and this is setting ourselves up for the final setting of everything. So one thing is that I never intended to take this entire class through to the rendering and compositing side. I wanted to go through all the effects and leave it at that, but the way things are shaping up, I think we might as well do the whole thing. So it's better to think ahead here a little bit. One thing that I think would be really critical is if we go back to our building asset, is to set up all the material IDs. And the material IDs is how we specify what faces use what ID. And so it's just important for us to make sure that all of this is set up correctly. So if you go into, I've just selected the floor, I've just selected one of these because you can see the text is bold. That means that all of these are actually instanced. So when I turn it off on one, it turns it off on all of them. So that's important just to keep in mind, is that these are linked. Okay, so you don't need to turn that off. I'm just trying to prove a point here that these are all linked. meaning that if I apply a material modifier, you can find it in here under M, so material, this will allow us to set the material ID to whatever we want. So just make sure that we don't have any selections. Yeah, and then we put a material ID on. So material ID 1, we're setting up. So that way, if we have multiple shaders that we want to apply to the same object, we do it based on the material ID. And this is important because we can actually go to our building here, and when we crack something, we could have the paint on the outside, but when it cracks on the inside, we could have concrete kind of exposed inside by setting a different material ID. Okay, so for now, we're just on building floor. We got material ID 1 set up. I already have set this up to an extent already. So I'll explain this in a moment, but with the floors, all we do is we put a material ID. With the glass, again, just to play it safe, we set material, so it defaults to 1. Now, when we go to the mullions, I already have a material ID set up on that, so material 1. If it isn't, then just put it on there. And then we have the precast, which is the walls, the concrete. Now, I already have set this up. And the reason for this is that I want to have 2 different shaders. I want to have the footage projected onto the front faces. So you can see, again, these are all instanced. You can see that the selection is actually around all the faces that are visible to camera. So in other words, when we look at this from a camera perspective, anything that's visible, I'm actually going to be locking the footage to that. And then everything else is material ID 1. So material ID 2 is the footage. So later on, material ID 3 could be the inner concrete. Hopefully this makes sense. I might put together a few bonus videos around projection mapping and stuff like this, just to make it really obvious. But just keep that in mind that this one is already set up. And then we have the roof. So again, material ID 1. These are all individual objects, so I'm just going to do it to all 3. Okay, so that one, because it's visible to the camera, that's set up already. So material ID 1 and 2. Okay, so that was pretty easy to get set up. The other thing is we need to set up the projection mapping, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Like I said, I might just create a bonus lesson around it if necessary. But I'm just going to go to frame 147, because that's just a good frame where all of this seems pretty visible. So 147, and I'm just going to go views and create standard camera from view. And sorry, let me do it again. So just from this view on frame 147, I'm going to hit P for perspective. Okay, but it's still the same camera. And now I'll do camera, create standard from view. I feel like there's a slight twist there. I don't know why I did that, but because it shouldn't. So I might need to just hit the roll and just slightly align this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Oops. Just slightly. Where's this being created? It's being created in here. So a couple of things. I'm going to select my camera. I'm just going to turn it into a free camera. And then I'm going to right click, choose local. And that way, it's very easy for me to compare the two. They're pretty identical, but I mean, if I wanted to, I would just, oops. Yeah, just ever so slightly. So they're almost there. Anyway, the whole point is that it should actually just create one exactly like it. For whatever reason, there's a slight offset to it, so we're just going to nudge it into place. I think that's fine, but you could definitely massage it if you wanted to. But with this new camera, let's just drag this over to cameras, and then let's also call this projection cam underscore F147. So at least we have a reference that it's using frame 147. Okay? And finally, with these objects, just with the walls, because they're going to use projection mapping, I'm just going to apply a camera map modifier. There's 2 in here, so when we click it, make sure it's not the one with WSM it's not going to be a world space modifier, so just normal camera map. Click there to apply it, click pick, and we'll choose our projection cam. And so make sure you're on frame 147 when you do that. What it's going to do is it's going to create projection mapping for this. So it's going to get the footage and lock it onto the object. We'll get into this later on. Like I said, it's something I didn't intend to cover. I just wanted to go through the effects in this specific class. But in this case, I figure it's worthwhile doing it because it's important to have that mapping coordinate set to this selection now, so that way our particle system will incorporate all of that. So that's the first thing that we need to do. And now that that's set up, we can just go about doing what we're doing. I'm going to change back to the regular camera and unhide our effects. So the next thing we want to do is I want to set up particle groups for all of the stuff that we want to break. So this is also really important because we're going through the final phase now where we're about to export everything out. And I want to have complete control over all of that. And I also want to be able to do other stuff to it if I want to. So going back into our dynamics here, I'm just going to disable this for a second. And let's talk about what we're going to do here. So right now, we've imported all this, we go through, we create all the destruction, it all looks really cool. We have the secondaries where we are breaking all that in the post frag. But all of this, we go back to the very beginning, uses these particle groups. So we have A, B, C, and then E and F. Sorry, so there's D. So A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay, and again, we don't need these guys because we're actually using them in here. So having these set up, the one thing that we do want to change is the Voronoi fracture. Now, what I want to do here is just for all of these, we need to go in, we need to scroll down to fractures and enable override cap material ID and set that to 3. Now, what we're doing is, if you can imagine, I wish I had my Wacom plugged in right now so I could draw this properly, but I'll do a terrible job here. So if we had a cube, and then the cube got cut in half, then we're going to have this here, and there's probably the inside kind of rubble there, and then on the other side, that would be the other piece and a bit of the rubble there. So whole point is that this section here is the inner piece that got created. So these are new faces that got created because we cut this in half. So we had the outside being material ID 1, and then occasionally, if like the camera was looking this way, then we might project ID number 2 on certain pieces. But we're saying, well, if there's this new geometry in the center, let's give that a separate material ID altogether, a material ID of 3. And that way, what will happen is we can assign a new shader or material in the center. In other words, we could have paint out here, footage from material ID 2, but then material ID 3 could be just rock or concrete or something exposed, and we could add displacement to that. We could do a lot with it. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, I'll probably cover this a little bit more in depth as a bonus lesson in case you want me to go further down the rabbit hole. But the main thing is that with all of these, we want to override the cap. The cap is just the new faces. The material ID to be 3. And we need to do that for all of these. So going back in again, material ID 3. Material ID 3 and material ID 3. In a second, there we go. Okay, We don't need to worry about the secondaries because it's glass, it's railings, we're not really going to see it. So it's not really necessary to go that far, but it is for these, at least for the floors, roofs, and walls. The frames, probably not, but we might as well do it, just in case. So, we got that set up, and remember, we're using these groups right now. In the dynamics, we kind of got to do the same here as well, because we're able to identify group A, frames group B, but we also want to set these up where we could say, well, you know, if an area gets broken, what if we want to do more with that? So we're going to need to set up particle groups for all of these to identify which area is the area that exploded when the ship came in, which area is the top roof that collapsed. So that way we have complete control over those as well. Before we do that, we should just update the Voronoi. So again, all the Voronoi fractures. I'm just going to scroll down and enable ID3. ID3, we got 2 more here. Okay, so that is all set up, that's good. And now, like I said, we just got to do the groups. So I'm just going to go and add particle group. I'm going to put this at the bottom, okay? Really important, let's always make these at the bottom. So that means that if they get filtered into the outside group or anything else, they'll never actually get sampled with this. So let's keep the groups off, because right now it seems to cause problems. So we'll just keep them in here, and I'm just going to say I for this one. And you can make it wide enough you can see what it's actually set to. So I can right click, paste, just regular paste down the bottom, and I'll set this one to J. This one to K. This one to L. This one to M. Oh, and we got to do one more thing here. I just realized I forgot. N. And O. So N, O. You can see the letters appearing here. So really important. We don't need to worry about delete because that means that they're gone. And we don't need to worry about the explosion either. So one last thing though. We set this up so that way whatever group they go into, later on we'll be able to access that information. So this is so critical to tag anything wherever it goes, so that way we can call it back later on. It'll make more sense later when we start doing this, but one really important thing is right now by default it's set to I. We want to add it to I. We don't want to set it to I. Okay, so again, I wish my Wacom was plugged in right now. This would be a lot easier to explain, but let's do this. We have our initial event here. So that is the prefrag, so that's 1. You can see how we number these. These are 1, and that's 2, and that's 3. So in the prefrag, we actually set all of these to A, B, C, and D. So we set them here to A, B, C, and D. Now, we then feed it into 2, which is where we are now. And that's a really terrible square, but you get the idea. So now we're in the dynamics here. And the way that we're able to read in each event is because we say A, B, C, D. And that way we do the walls, railing, floors, and then roof. And that's how we're doing this. So we can split them up, and then we feed them all into our system, and we let it do its thing. So that's A, B, C, D. Now, if we were to set this, it means it's going to override it. So when it goes into the new event, it forgets where it came from, and it's now just set to I, which means later on we can access I or JKLMNO. We can access all of those. But if I wanted to specifically say I just want to access the windows only or the walls only later on, I can't do that because it forgot where it came from. But if we add it into this group, that means that a piece will be, A if it's a wall, but it's also going to be an I because it was an I. Okay, so this can be a little bit confusing, but hopefully that's making sense, that we're keeping where they came from. We're just adding these new groups. So that way it can exist in multiple groups here, and it means that I can say just the roof and that's it. Or I could say all the pieces that broke and fell on the ground, or whatever we want to do. Or I could actually do a combination, I believe. I've never actually done it, but a combination where it's like maybe the roof and in this other event. So that's what we're doing. So we want to make sure all of these groups are called add, not set. So just go through and make these all to add. And again, like, this stuff isn't like, hey, I want to blow stuff up. This isn't very fun, but this is what you do to be smart, okay? This is what you do in production. You set everything up in an intelligent way that you got complete control over everything. Now, it means we can access every single one of these groups, and we can specifically say just the window frames in this group. We can do all that now. So I'm gonna let this cache the entire event out again. And this is the annoying thing, is like right now, every time we update this, we got to go and, like, anytime we load the file, we got to go and cache it, which is like 20 minutes. And it's frustrating, but that's what we're going to do next, is we're actually going to go and export all of this out, and we're going to keep all the information. Like, once this is exported, we have a fast loading cache, we don't need to turn TypeFlow on anymore, we can still access all the groups, which means rendering and everything is completely controllable. But we're going to do a couple more things first. We're actually going to go and add detail to everything. We're going to export physical objects that we can collide with. We're going to do some really cool stuff. To do all of that, we got to be intelligent. We got to do things right. And that's one thing I take pride in, is that the training I'm teaching you is for Hollywood level production. It isn't the guy who does logo stuff or, whatever, who's teaching you the new TypeFlow fracturing stuff or whatever, just stuff that's not actually in a production environment, because it's cool, like, hey, here's how you add a Voronoi object in a collision, but it's not going to help you down the line when you're actually trying to do things in the way that we would in feature film. And that does require sometimes the boring stuff to happen, so that way we're setting up multiple systems to get to a point where we have 100% control, we're doing things fast and optimized, everything's working really well. So I'm just going to play this through to the last frame, and then we can move to the next step. Okay, so everything is cached. It took about 30 minutes. I accidentally left the glass and railings on, which at least this minute is a bit overkill, so I'm going to turn it off for now, because I just want to focus on the main stuff, and it's just, it's more RAM that we're taking up having all that calculated, even though it is cool. So at this point, we got all of our stuff breaking. It's pretty awesome. Now there's a couple of things that I want to do. One is that we've got particles, especially the glass, everything else. It's a lot to deal with. So what I want to do is I want to bake out just original objects that are collidable, specifically for the building. And that means that we don't need to worry about window frames, but we want the floor, the roof, and the walls in the areas that are going to collide with our building to be baked out. So to do this, I'm going to create another box. Haven't made one of these in a while. And what I want to do with this box is I want to kind of define what areas I want to consider to be collidable. And I would imagine it's mostly just the top and around this area. I'm going to right click, object properties, display as box as usual, and we'll just call this cull box because we're going to cull everything outside of it. And I don't know, what do we want to do? Cull box object bake, because we're going to bake out all the animation. So I think that that's a good amount. I think we'll still manually delete a lot of stuff afterwards too. But the whole idea is that everything inside of here is the only stuff that we're going to want to export out. So under post frag, we've got a lot of stuff going on already. We've got the glass, we've got the railings. If we want, we could set this up as a different system. In fact, we'll do that. So I'm going to click new. And so with this one, Tyflow, I'm going to rename this to TYF4 and then export. Okay. And so what I want to do with this is I'm going to bring in our building animation, and then I'm going to say just include the area that's in this section. And I'm also going to bring in the original building too. So, by the way, I just realized I did that off screen. I apologize for that. I totally just clicked new and did this completely off screen. So, yeah, all we did is I clicked new and then I renamed it to that. So just to clarify what the heck is going on. So our big goal here is that we're going to import the animation from our destruction building, bring it into our system, and then we're going to bring in the original less detailed geometry and have one read the other. Kind of similar to how we did the post frag, like the glass and everything here, but without bindings or anything in that sense. So initially I'm just going to create a birth flow and pick the two dynamics. So this is our big complex dynamic system. So what we'll have is by bringing that in, I'm just going to now bring in the flow as well, because we want to get the animation for it. So again, I'm just going to pick the particle system, and that way it's all good to go. And just make sure your display is set to geometry. Okay, so now that this is reading it all in, what I want to do is I want to get the original prefrag geometry, and I want to tie it to this, because the prefrag geometry doesn't have as much detail. It's simpler geometry, which will be easy for us to bake out and use for collisions, rather than this ultra detailed stuff, which is going to get very slow very quickly. So again, doing a birth flow. Let's go to the first frame to speed this up, and I'm just going to pick the prefrag geometry this time. Now, I don't need to worry about animation because I'm going to get the animation from this guy. The final thing that I want to do is I'm going to do a surface test, and we'll keep the surface test before the flow. And that way it'll delete anything. It'll just be quicker overall because it'll delete stuff and then assign the animation. So with the surface test, I'm going to change this to outside. I'm going to pick the bounding box we have, and then I'm going to make a delete operator and then link that in. And that's just going to delete all of the stuff that's outside of our box. And the cool thing is I can just copy that now and paste it in here, link that up, and that way we're keeping this ultra clean. Now, if you see the playback, it's way quicker because it's not having to update some more stuff. So the next big challenge is to get all of the prefrag geometry to have the same animation. So the way to do that is let's change the display to geometry, and I'm going to change the display here to large dots. And that way we can still see what the animation does, but we're focused on getting this to do that, if that makes sense. So in the past we used like particle binding for the glass and the railings, which worked out great because we're just more getting them to inherit that motion. But with this, we want the orientation and everything else to match pretty accurately, and we want it to stay stuck to it the entire time. So it's a little bit of a different process. And a way to do this is to use a set target. And set target allows this to target or tie itself to other systems. So I'm going to put this down here, and we may or may not keep this on. We'll see, because it might be better to have the surface test. It might be good to have all of the particles around it, just to give a bit more accuracy. So we'll see how we go. The main thing is that we'd want to choose link to target. And by doing that, in theory, this stuff would link to the nearest particle. And that's how we're going to set this up. So rather than by value, we can say from neighbors. And by neighbors, it's going to be looking at whatever the closest particle is. And because these are all birthed from the same place, it works out pretty well. Now, to go a step further, I apologize for kind of going back and forth on this, I'm actually going to bring in the number 2 dynamics. So I'm just changing our birth flow to the same system. This way they're 100% the same, and they should be anyway, but it's just more as a precaution. But with the target, we're setting a radius for this, and we can just do shape radius then, because I'm more confident knowing that they're all in the same world. Again, the other one, this one isn't updating yet, it's just going to be this guy. And right now, if we were to play this, it won't work, or it won't work properly. And there's a big reason for that I'm going to get into in a moment. So we are getting some motion, which is cool, but the main thing is the timing. Okay, and I want to leave this to later just because I want to make this very obvious, but timing, when we change this to continuous, is really important. And there's a lot of stuff that we're going to be doing soon that a lot of the time you're going to be like, why is this not working? And it's because the timing was set to on entry rather than continuously trying to check it. So make sure, if something's not working, to make sure continuous is turned on. So we're saying neighbors, so this way these chunks are looking for the nearest dot to it to parent itself to. And if we wanted, we could go further and actually say to exclude the other particles. There's a lot of things we could do with it. For now, I'm just going to say within radius, shape radius, and it's going to use the closest. So all that default stuff is good. Filtering, you know, it's up to us how we want to do this. I'm just going to say exclude this event, so that way it's specifically or exclusively only looking at this guy. Okay, so already I think we should be in a pretty good spot where we're continuously updating this. It's looking within its own shape for a similar particle, and it's linking to it. So these other particles are moving, and it's going to say, well, you're near me, so why don't I do what you're doing? So we're not getting 100% accuracy yet, and I think it's because the particle counts, like, not particle count, I should say, but I think having the surface test off here is probably a good thing. That way it's just got more particles to work with. So I think that would be a critical one, to keep this turned off. It's good to have on in general. Just in a case like this, I think it's probably better to have the surrounding particles also active, so that way they play an influence as well. So another important thing we should just quickly do is with the surface test, timing, again, is everything. We don't want to continuously delete it. So we're just going to say event entry, and that one's turned off. So that's important too, so that way it's just deleting stuff on the first frame, and then after that it's free to leave the box. Okay, so we've done that, we've got it all set up. This is just to confirm, only doing it on event entry. This is doing it on continuous. And finally, now that we've got this set up, we're just going to set it up for all the different groups. And again, it's important just to have the right particles sitting in the right area. So the last thing that we're going to do is set this only to use the walls, which is group A, and same thing here, group A. And by doing that, it means that we only have these guys working with the same system. And we'll need to do this for each of the groups. But as this comes in now, we'll see that we have these big chunks, and they're all moving, they're kind of rotating the same way, and doing everything they should be doing. So as it collides, all of this is moving down with it. Now, this isn't perfect by any means, because we have 10 different particles for one bigger chunk. And so it's trying to parent itself to maybe a piece that's really small or stuff like that. That's not a big deal because all we're doing is we just want to have some crude geometry that roughly does what this is doing. We don't want to have like heavy amounts of fragmenting going on. We just want to work with this stuff. So as long as this wall is falling down the same time as the geometry is falling down, it means the fluids are going to be pushed down with it. So it doesn't need to be 100% perfect. The other thing is that the other particles will die, and so whereas these ones we don't actually want to ever die, and that's why we don't ever tell them to die. And the reason is because we're going to be exporting this as keyframe geometry. We just want to use it as a physical object. So it doesn't make sense to have all the particles delete, because we can't get keyframe objects to delete themselves. They got to be physically in the scene. So hopefully this makes sense. It will when we export this, but it's pretty much something that we're just trying to get big chunks to follow roughly what all of this stuff is doing. And it's stuff that is purely there to physically have the fluid rolling around with. So the final thing that we can do here is I'm just going to do a send out. And to send out, let's put here, I'm going to filter. So enable filters, add. And I'm just going to say anything that's really small, because again, like it's not really going to, let's say 35 or something, and link that up. It's not really going to collide with anything if there's small chunks. So a few of these things we can delete because I think that they're small enough that it doesn't really matter, and I just want the big chunks, which are really going to be the thing that influences everything. So by doing that, we're just going through, watching this again, everything's still doing what it should be doing, so we're good. So I like that. I mean, it gives us something where, again, the animation isn't perfect by any means, but it's accurate, and it's just these bigger chunks, okay? And like I said, when the particle dies, they just stop, which is totally fine. It's just as long as the entire building is collapsing. Because this is how, when an explosion runs through here, it's going to collide with the floor, the ceiling, burst out the windows, and then we're able to use all of that to get like the proper motion. But then we also don't want the floor and everything to sit there when the building's not there anymore, so this is actually going to cause it to all be pulled down with it. Okay, so I'm just going to rename these now to read, and then 2_dynamics, and then I'm going to call this export geo walls. I actually call these walls just so we know that they're walls. So we've done that to one system, and now we can copy the entire thing, and we can do it again for the floors. So export this time we could say C, and I might do the window frames too, we'll see. But I'll do these guys first because I think that that's important to get going. So that's the key thing, is just to make sure we've set this up correctly. So this comes in, we go all the animation, we just want to make sure that all of this is falling down correctly. Like I said, it might look a bit weird because we're seeing this out of context and these are bigger chunks, but overall it's more about getting all of this to react the way that it should. So this is all perfect. Okay, so again, we can just rename this to floors. And I'm just going to quickly jump through and do the remaining ones. So frames, which we may or may not use, it just depends on how much detail goes into it. So this would be B. But I do like the idea of the explosions and fire and everything kind of pushing through those window frames, so we'll see. Okay, and then finally down here, we'll do D. So roof. Roof. And the only reason I'm turning it off is just so it's a tiny bit quicker. But it's still, every time we change this, it's all updating everything, so there's not that big a speed difference, which is frustrating. And yeah, that's why we're doing this whole setup, is because we're able to be a lot more intelligent. Okay, so is that getting all the ceiling? I guess it is. So everything's parented to everything. And now the entire thing will just work. It means that we've got everything that we can work with. Now I'm going to export all of this, so I want to make sure nothing's selected. I'm going to click Create New Layer, and I'll just call this Collision Dynamics. And I'm just going to do an export, and we're going to say Objects. We can choose the range, we can do all that stuff. I'm going to keep this all at default. The key thing is objects means it's going to be keyframed data. It's going to be just every single one of these pieces will be an individual object. This is what I mean. It's going to get messy in a moment, because from there we probably might delete more stuff. Like, I want to keep this like ultra fast to work with. But that's the key thing. In terms of the name, we could call this TieFlow node. I'm going to call this KF for keyframe. I just want to be really precise about this. And you can choose like what it actually exports. So if you want to just point helpers that you could link to, you could do that. But in this case, like, we want physical objects. So that's important. And reference objects, which would mean if you wanted a cube or something like that. But if we wanted to change the shape, we would just replace the shape. It wouldn't be that big a deal to just add a shape operator in. So keep that in mind too. You've got lots of options. So I'm going to hit export down the bottom. And we'll just let this bake out. So a couple of quick things I just want to mention. I just jumped ahead a little bit here because I forgot to mention, if we hit export and everything, it's actually going to export all of this stuff too, which we don't want. So just add in a particle group. I actually just instanced this, copy pasted it down, but just set this to P. And then for our export, let's wait for this to autosave. Come on. Get to the chopper. There we go. So we always want to export group P under general settings. The other thing just to keep in mind is to cap out your maximum objects. By default, it is defaulting to 1000. I think there's about 3200 objects in here. So put this up to a higher value, just anything, so that way it'll export all of it. Finally, when you hit export, it's going to take a moment, and then it's going to come back saying, do you wish to export 3200 objects or whatever it is, and you just got to hit OK. So those are the key things. Once that's done, because I went ahead and did it already, we have everything in here. So we can just turn this off for a second, or hide it, whatever. Why is it still there? I wonder why. So these are all keyframed objects, which is really cool. So, like I said, there's going to be stuff sticking here, and that's because they are objects that got, the particle got deleted, so they need to exist somewhere. So the main thing is we just want to make sure that there's nothing still untouched. And in this case, everything moved. So we're in a good spot. Like, we have our entire building, falling away, doing its thing. So, like I said, it doesn't look pretty, but that's because we're exporting keyframed objects. Like every single one of these is keyframed. It has animation curves. So that's really critical because we want to then get this stuff to collide physically with our simulation. Like if you wanted to, you could go back now to your ship trails and add this in. And when the building collapses, it's going to push the stuff down. None of this is renderable. So it's not like we're going to look at this thing and be like, man, you ugly. We're just using this to physically have something so the ground collapses. You can imagine all this dust, and then the ceiling falls down. It's going to create all the velocities for it. So yes, by design, it's going to look really ugly, but we're going to have that for later on, and it's going to be really useful. But what we're going to be rendering will look more like this. Now comes the next part. Like we're going to get into exporting all of this geometry out as well. There's one more step that I want to do before we get into this, which is to add detail to some of this stuff. Because if we look at the very end, it looks awesome. Like I'm really happy with what we've done, but there are these pieces of geometry that are kind of facety, especially up here. Like to me, this is what catches my eye. Most of this isn't visible because we'll have so many explosions and everything going on, but I do want to talk about this whole process and how you can work with it. So let's get into doing the post-fracture process. Let me say that again, post-fracture process, and then we're going to cache all this out as a finished object. So by the end of this, we'll have everything we need. We won't be having to work in Tyflow, I think, at all for the remainder of the lessons, at least for all the hero effects. So yeah, let's keep moving forward. Okay, we've done a lot, and the last thing that we want to do is I'm just going to import and set up our final system. We're just going to export everything out as a Tyflow cache. Now, you could just go and drop an export node in here. That'd be perfectly fine. Just keep in mind that as soon as you do that, you're changing the system, so you'd need to recalculate it, which is like 30 minutes of work. On top of that, I won't cover it in this video. I'm going to cover it actually as a bonus. I had originally planned to add detailing in here, but I think that it kind of deserves its own lesson. So I'm going to do this as a bonus lesson outside of everything else. However, by setting up what we're about to do here, if we wanted to detail anything out, we can then do it very easily. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to get a birth flow and a flow update. And remember in here we output I, J, K, blah, blah, blah. So in here, I'm just going to rename this to I. And I'm just going to pick the the dynamics here. And I'll do it again here, dynamics. So we've specified these. Now let's just disable this while we're working on it. So we specified this. I'm just going to choose I as the group. We don't need to do anything else here, and we don't need to touch anything else here. I'm going to right click. Actually, yeah, I think that's good. So we'll just right click, copy paste. So this would be J, K. So I'm going to hit enter on that. L, M, N, M, N, O. And then we don't need to worry about P, I don't think. So I think it's just these guys. So now in the birth, we got I, and then let's just change this to J, and this one to K. That's J, K, L. Sorry, I'm just clicking everything by accident. Ugh, there we go. N. So we don't have to do the step, but by doing it, it's all set up so that way if we wanted to make any modifications, we can. All of that set up, and then we just do an export. I actually named this keyframe export. I just named that kind of offline. And then we'll call this geocache export. And in here, we can just say, okay, well, I want to export these groups and nothing else. That means it's going to ignore the sphere and everything else. It's just going to bring these in and nothing else. It's going to be TypeFlow cache. All of this is good. I just need to specify an output path. Like so. And we're good. So at this point, I can just enable this and run it. And yeah, it'll all be good. And then from there, if we wanted to add any detail to any specific groups or anything like that, we can do that very easily. In fact, I will talk about the detailing just because we're here, so why not, right? I'm not going to go super crazy though. I'm just going to point out one thing, and I'll do another lesson later where I'll go crazy. So if we have our dynamics, here's the thing that bothers me, is like we've got all of this detail, and with the glass and everything else, which we should export as well, I'll look into it. What would be cool is to add some detail to this area here, because all of this falls, this remains the same, and unfortunately it's just very flat, very boring. So it'd be cool, even if it is just these chunks, to add some detail to them. So how do we do that? Well, what I can do, I can go into the TypeFlow dynamics, and let's just go in here, and I'm just going to start clicking through the displays to turn off a group and then on a group. And then hopefully we'll get lucky and be like, oh, okay, well, obviously it's the K group. Now, if we go into object export, all of this stuff is turned off. We can turn K on, and let's just enable this. And we can hide the dynamic group and bring back the export group. So right now, all we're going to see is the K group. Let's go wait for that to import. Come on. Okay, so here we can see everything. And I just wanted these guys, nothing else. So there's so many ways that we could do this. But I think the easiest way is probably just do what we've been doing a lot, which is making boxes. So because this is static, it's not moving, we might as well just create an area, and we'll just call this box. I don't know what to call this. We'll call this detail volume 01. I don't know, something like that. It's kind of funny because I come up with like random names for this stuff, but because this is training, the studios I've gone to where they're using my terminology, and it's like, oh, you got to use a kill box on that, and you got to do this, and it makes me realize I should probably name stuff better if it ends up becoming kind of law. So in here, I'm going to do a surface test. Pick our object. Again, I just might disable this while I'm working on it. And we're just going to say if you're inside of that volume, then just going to copy this here and display these as dots. Drag this down here. Oops, actually, I don't have to do that. I just need to connect this. And I'll put it down there. Okay, so all I'm saying is if you're inside of this box, which it is, go into this event. And I'm just displaying dots here, so that way we know it's in a new event because it'll display as geometry. Here's the other thing. We don't want it to work right away. We want it to work later on. So I kind of need to look at this and say, well, what frame? And I think it's around a frame 180 that this area snaps. So it's right around here that I want to pretty much just activate this whole section. So let's do this. In here, we can say, well, timing, rather than all the time, let's say frame 181. And so that way it's going to get all the particles that are in this volume at frame 181, and they're going to move into this group, which is where we can add detail. The other thing, though, is I also don't want the small pieces because I want to add detail to the pieces that are going to get recognized. So I need to change this, the radius, to be at least 40, so greater than 40. So we're filtering this, so if it's in the box and the size is larger than 40, and it's after frame 181, then move into this group. So now that we've done all of that, I can enable this, and now we're at frame 184, so hopefully they're going to show up. Okay, so now we can see that that's working. I feel like we need a little bit more width here. Just waiting for this to calculate again. Alright, so I'm going to go a bit more crazy. Make it much wider, longer. Okay, so I'm hoping that's all we need. And if that's the case, then the next step, and again I'll turn it off while I do this, I'm going to add in a sub D. So subdivide. And I'm also just going to add a displacement as well. Make sure the displacement is underneath, because otherwise it's not going to work properly. Now, to start with, let's throw the value up a little bit higher. We'll say relative to scale, which means if it's slightly smaller, then this value will be smaller too. But the lower the value, the more tessellation, the more detail is being added in. So let's just take a look at this and see what we get. If it doesn't show up, it's because timing needs to be set to continuous. Okay, it is showing up, but it won't. If I go one more frame, it's going to turn off. And I'll explain in a moment. So we can see based on the edge length, we're getting a lot of detail, probably more than we need. So, because I don't want to go crazy on this, you got to keep in mind that there are, I think it's like 15,000 pieces, something like that. So we want to do something where we're not going crazy with the detail, but we've got enough that we can get some interesting shapes to this. So let's just start with that and we'll see how we go. So the other thing, like I said, is to set the timing to be continuous. Otherwise, upon entry, it's going to show the tessellation and then it'll turn off again. So going back to displace, I'm going to change this to noise. Let's just turn this off while we do this. I'm going to make this about 0.6 and give this about 20 face normals. Oh, really important, material ID of 3. Remember going back to our dynamics, all the Voronoi, we went in and we said we want the inner faces that are being created to be a different material ID. So now we're saying the inner faces only will have any displacement. So using face normals is a good way because it has orientation, so the directions will work better. Strength obviously is just how much it displaces. Scale, smaller it is, the more small the pattern's going to be. So let's just see this and we can kind of get an idea. Again, we need to turn timing on to continuous. So continuous. And I'm just waiting for this to calculate. I threw these numbers in, but I kind of know roughly after staring at this thing for a couple of days, like what values to throw in. So you can see here, we just added all this detail. And if we were to look back at our camera, before this was all flat and boring, now we're seeing some detail. And yes, we can definitely add more detail, but I'm trying to be intelligent about this because we have so much to work with. So by doing this, it means that this area now will, as soon as it goes in that group, which is 181, we add all this detail. So that's interesting. I didn't realize it's bubbling up. So maybe I'm just trying to keep this on event entry. Let's just see if that works better. Yeah, so that's giving us displacement. So I guess it's just sub D that we need to worry about that. Okay. So that works really well, and that's how we were able to add that in. Now I'm going to change my display to geometry, and it just means that now we have some displacement, and we could totally bump this up a bit more, 35, which is kind of crazy, to be honest, that value. It's a little extreme, but these chunks are bigger, so they need to be a little bit more pronounced. But if you look at this now, compared to before where it's very flat and boring, like the stuff outside of the object, this stuff has a lot more character to it. So you can imagine we could do this with a lot of stuff. And here's where it's a bit of a rabbit hole, and that's why I didn't want to cover it in this lesson, because it's very easy to go overboard and then your sims are taking forever. Just as an example, I'm not going to export it out because I don't want to spend a lot of time with like really ultra detailed geometry, but we could detail out all this stuff. I just think it's going to be covered in dust, so it's kind of not worth worrying about. But with the other groups, if we were to go back and turn dynamics on, we got all of this crazy stuff happening, right? So let's go to a frame where we're seeing lots of detail, like one of the last frames. That's where I feel like we can see all this stuff. So let's go back in, and we're looking at, this is M. I'm going to turn display off. So that's actually a huge majority of it is that group. So M. Let's go back to export. And let's look at M. Now, just like before, you know, we can add in... Just wondering why that's not showing up. Okay, just need to refresh. We can add in the displacement and Voronoi. We wouldn't put it into a box this time though, because we actually want everything to be dynamic, because it's in motion, right? So what we can do... Oh, another thing, just really quick. Never mind, we're good. So I'm just gonna... I was just making sure the timing's all good in that. So I'm just copy pasting these into M. Now, like I said, I know that this is going to be a smaller piece, so we probably need to add the displacement at a lower value. And I'll keep that the same, but let's add a filter. I'm going to add in the radius. And we'll say if it's greater than 33. Let's try that. Now I'm just going to copy. So there's a little ... button, copy selected. And let's go to displace. We want to do the same thing. We want to enable this and then paste. Okay. So now these two will only turn on for rocks that are bigger than 33, I think it was. So turn this on, let it do its thing. Like I said, this can be something where it's like, well, I want to add detail to this one, and suddenly you got this gigantic cache. So it's better just to think of the ones that are really important, or once you're 100% happy with everything, you can actually do it by particle ID. So there might be specific ones that in the render you're looking at, you're like, all right, I want to fix that one and that one and that one, and you can go in and do exactly that. So there's different ways you can do this for sure. But you can see, like, I'm actually not going to pause the recording because I want to show, like, it's taking a good minute, and that's just for one group. So let's change the display to geometry. But hopefully this makes sense, like the advantage of doing it this way too. And we need more displacement. Before I go on my rant, I'll just say radius is greater than 33. Timing. I think for this, maybe it needs to be continuous. I'm just going to try it because it doesn't feel like there's. Maybe there is. So all I was going to say is that if we were to do this, like everywhere I've seen like paid courses on Tyflow people put out, where they're doing stuff like that. It's nuts. Where you're doing any detailing that you're adding is in the simulation, and then the simulation, you can see it's taking a while. In the simulation, it's then going to calculate all of these collisions, and sometimes that's necessary for like big hero chunks. But for something like this, can you imagine if you added all this detail to all the geometry and you're running the sim? Like, this is going to take days. So this isn't too slow overall, but you know, it's mainly just because we're trying to, you know, pre-roll so far that it's just having to subdivide everything every single frame, which gets really slow. But I mean, overall this isn't too bad. So I'm just trying to find a good obvious chunk. So if we look at this stuff here, you can tell the difference between this chunk, which obviously is too small to be flagged, but these chunks are looking more like rock. So they just feel a lot more organic. And then if we go for the bigger chunks, you can see that, yeah, they're looking really nice. So I'm going to jump ahead to one of the later frames, but that's pretty much it. Like, I don't want to go crazy with this stuff. I set my strength to 25, the radius is 33. That's pretty much all it needs to be. And then, yeah, I've just got continuous on the entire time. So I was tried for a second to do per event, but no, it needs to be continuous. Okay, and like that didn't take too long. And we can see, like, this is where all the details kicking in. So all of this now, all these top chunks, have got a lot of detail to them. And if we wanted less, then we would raise that radius up. So they'd have to be bigger, or if we wanted more, then we can bring it down. Oh, so one thing, because I paused it just to not have to wait so long, but the other thing I did do is I set my edge length to 20, just so that way it's got a bit more detail to it. So I think this is too much detail in my opinion, but it looks cool. Like, these chunks definitely stand out as looking really cool, and the fact that they're the top layer means that this is the stuff that, if it's really flat and facety, we're definitely going to pick up on that. So I think that this will work really well. Okay, so that's it. We just need to export the stuff out now. So again, disable just for a second. I'm going to turn all of these guys on. And then we just export it, and we should be golden. Oh, while we're at it, I'll do it after, but we need to do the same thing, not the displacement, just importing in our post frags and doing that stuff here. So we can do that separately though. Okay, so everything's looking really good. Here's the final cache, and that's all looking fine. If we jump ahead a little bit, we can see all the detail in the displacement being added there. So all of this works out really well. We can actually go and introduce post-fracture detail into our simulation without having to actually simulate it itself. So that's the beauty of this, is that we've done this in an intelligent way, where we've initially imported everything, and then in a separate system we also import the glass and rails, which we're about to cache as well. And then we have a full dynamic system that's treating everything very specifically based on all the conditions we set up, whether they're velocity, radius, collisions, or whether they're in a certain box, or whatever we set up. We've even animated the top of the building collapsing down, everything that we want. Then we're doing this whole post-fracture setup, so that way we're able to get the glass and the railings to get destroyed without them actually being dynamic, just reading out the other animation. Finally, then we export everything as keyframed information here, and we then export all of this as a cache. So now all of this is set up as a single object, and we have mapping set up, everything's good, we can apply a shader to it. if this is production, we could hand this to the lighting department, they could do their thing. And under elements, I can still access specifically the groups that I want. So all of this is controllable in here. If I wanted to apply a shader specifically just to a certain object, remember all the initial tagging that we did way back here, we did these as sets, whereas these ones, when we added the groups to them, J, I, all of these, they're added, meaning they're not overriding anything. So because of that, I can specifically load in just the windows, or I can do a certain event as well. So we've got complete control over everything. We've done this in an intelligent way, allowing us the freedom to be able to do so much with this and continue to do so much more as well. Finally, the final step is that we need to do the glass. So the glass and railings we've imported here. We've done the whole post-fracture setup. I've gone ahead and done this just as an extra step. So here, I've just gone and added in a group called O, and I pasted instance that into these three events. So this glass is all O, and then I did a particle group, sorry, not that guy, here, for P, for these guys. I did these groups because we don't want to cache these buildings, we just want to cache the glass and the railings. So I went ahead and just set this up now ahead of time just to save a bit of time, because we've already done this. I don't want to waste your time by doing the same thing again. So by simply setting these up, I'm able now to cache these out based on when they get imported in a moment. So just to show this really quick, or I guess it's asking the cache. So that works out well for us. So I'll do post frag and tie cache. It's weird, I thought that would display. So anyway, we've got these ones. So all I'm going to do is in the export is I'm going to go to our birth, make that, okay, so I did set this up, O and P. So these are both good to go. I'm finally just going to paste this here. And we don't have anything else turned on, so it's not like I can accidentally save out the wrong thing. I'm just going to call this geocache glass, even though it's glass and railings, and we're good. Actually, and I'll just do this for fun. O and P. Okay, so I can export this in a moment. And then the final thing, we'll have the glass, the railings, and all of this going on. Okay, so just turn all of these off except for the export, and I'll hit cache. Okay, so now I just have these two nodes making up the entire effect. So it's going to be probably a little bit slow in the viewport just because, again, like we have a lot of data. So I'm just going to jump ahead to, let's say, 110, something like that, when the explosion is just beginning. As you can see, it's taking a little while to load. It's not bad. That's like, what, 5 seconds? But we can see all the glass is breaking, the rails, everything is falling apart. So all of this is now renderable, all the mapping coordinates, everything's set up. We can also use the group IDs, everything that we talked about. So I think at this point it should be a good chance to sit back and congratulate yourself on completing all of the destruction part of this. We still have the explosions and the pyroclastic dust falling down. A lot of that really makes up the shot, but this itself is looking pretty damn cool. And again, all the glass and everything else like really makes it up. And let's run a preview of this so we can check it out. Okay, and here we go. So one thing just to mention really quick is that you'll see a lot of flickering. That's purely just OpenGL. It's just in the viewport. As you've seen in my renders, they render out fine. But that's looking pretty cool, right? So the main thing is that right now we've added detail up here. We've added this displacement saying, okay, well, anything that's within this radius in this group and blah, blah, blah has all this tessellation. So there are chunks down here, which again, I think all of this will be occluded by the dust. But if there was like, oh, these couple of pieces here, or it'd be really cool just to have all of this be more detailed out, you can simply just go to that group. I think it's like M or O, one of those. And you could just say, okay, all the big chunks, I want to apply that tessellation method and cache it out. Just, it will start to get slow if you're starting to do it to a lot of it, because keep in mind that like we did like 10 chunks there, but if you've got thousands all being tessellated and displaced every single frame, you know, obviously once it's cached out, it's faster, but it does get a little bit slow. So this is the effect. It's looking pretty awesome. I love some of the dangly bits, you know, all the stuff here, like the window frames, the glass, everything caving, and you see like this piece here, for instance, kind of getting hit and breaking a bit. All of this stuff here is really cool. So again, like we've done a lot. We put in a lot of work. Everything's looking really cool. This is all the glass raining down. Really awesome. I just want to mention one last thing. So we've exported a lot of stuff, and I'm going to export one more thing. So we've got these guys here that we were working on, and all I want to do, I want to copy and paste this here. Instead of saying keyframe export, I'm going to say TyFlow we'll just call this collision cache export. And with this one, I'm going to make this TyFlow cache and just specify a path, and we'll just call this collision cache. Okay, so I just want to export these guys out as well. So just turn them all back on, and we'll hit export. Now the reason is because we have these keyframed version in case we want that. I think it'd be handy to also have like a low-res TyFlow cache that we could collide with too. So I just want to generate this, and we'll keep moving forward. So I just want to quickly add this in. I'm actually doing this after the fact because I'm like, oh, you know what? It'd be good to have this just in case. So in the next video, we're going to do some really cool stuff. The big core lessons coming up now is going to be focused on the explosions and the dust. Those are the two key ones. And I'd like to also show some compositing, how I did the night vision effect, if that's something that interests you as well, to kind of get that look. Okay, we covered a lot of really valuable techniques in this lesson, and we also now have finalized our building asset. So this information is so critical to what we're doing, but also for almost every other type of destruction shot we'll ever have to approach. Learning to bake out collision objects as well as the post-fracture process will allow you to work faster while still adding as much detail to your simulations as possible. So in production, I've supervised artists who've tried to add their detail to the actual simulations on buildings as detailed as these, and the results are typically days to simulate if they ever get completed at all. So this is a massive problem where artists burn through time wasting and waiting on sims just because they're not intelligently put together. So I think it's important to think ahead and learn to optimize and keep your simulations as clean as possible, and implement detail where it's needed when it's needed, rather than just hitting sim with everything included from the glass, the displaced rocks, metal bending, and everything else in one giant mess of a sim that's likely to crash or run out of memory because zero thought ever went into the process before they started. That's why these lessons have been so critical, to show you how to do the correct process of what we're doing on a typical typical Hollywood film. And this is what we cover extensively throughout the entire live action series, learning the actual process that we use day to day in feature film production, but also a lot of secrets and techniques that we've developed to really push things to a higher level, using real shots, real workflows, and real production proven processes to create Hollywood level production visual effects shots. So in the next lesson, we're going to segue for a moment and work on a whole new and shorter lesson on driving a wrecking ball through a building structure. So this is going to be a ton of fun just because it's something I want to discuss, and I want us to learn how to do wood splinter dynamics as well as rope dynamics, attachment constraints, and so much more. So the actual wrecking ball is completely a rope simulation with a ball attached, which dynamically smashes into the structure and everything breaks based on those conditions. So this is mostly just to be a short break from all the hard work we're doing, just to mix things up a little bit. But after that, the remaining lessons will be covering the explosions, the pyroclastic dust, and so much more, and bringing all of our hard work together as we reach the end of the training. So the next 4 videos are going to be really insane. And by the way, I'm still replying to everyone's emails from the last video, but getting this feedback has been so helpful and so awesome. So I'll be honest, working on this course, it's literally been 8 months of non-stop work, late nights, and blood, sweat, and tears. So a lot of you know it's been quite nerve-wracking as we get closer with this. And I've put so much work into this upcoming course, as well as time, as well as financially investing in this course to make it as great as it can be. And I really hope it covers everything you could ever possibly want. So I really value your input, and I want to say thanks from the bottom of my heart. The FXTD mentorship has been such an amazing experience for me, getting to know a lot of you, interact with a lot of you, get drunk with some of you, as well as hanging out at live events, and of course in the live reviews, getting to know a lot of you there as well. So I honestly hope that we can 10x the experience with this one, and getting your help and your feedback at this point is really critical. So if you haven't sent off a quick email yet, please spend a few minutes right now just to let me know what you would like to really see in this upcoming course and what you'd like to get a little bit more light shed upon so I can make this all happen for you. Alright, that's it for now. Check out the next video, it will be coming soon, and I can't wait to show you all the cool things coming up. This is going to be awesome.